This episode is sponsored by Lupton Capital, which provides a variety of investment services to both retail and institutional investors on platforms such as Seeking Alpha, Substack, and StockTwits. For more information on these services or for links to those services, please visit luptoncapital.com. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Investing with the Whales podcast. My name is Jonah Lupton. I am your host. Really excited today to talk to Francis. We've been following each other for a couple years on Twitter. You probably know him on Twitter as InvestiAnalyst?
That's correct. InvestiAnalyst.
InvestiAnalyst. Wait, there's an I in there though, right?
Yeah, it's so Investi. Exactly. That's correct.
Okay.
You can't miss that I.
And then he also has a Substack called Software Analyst newsletter, and that link's in his Twitter bio. But one of the reasons I follow him, he's definitely a thought leader when it comes to cloud stocks, but especially cybersecurity. I know he's done work with Contrary. I know he's been in the VC industry for a little while now. He's also working on a few more ventures, which we're going to talk about in a couple seconds. But first off, Francis, welcome to the show.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jonah, for having me. Glad to be here.
Give us a little background. I mean, I definitely know you're in the trenches when it comes to cybersecurity, but how did that all start?
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting question. So I think I started my career more within the data analytics space. So that was actually where I started my career, more so helping out with data analytics projects, implementing of AI and ML, kind of like Snowflake kinds of projects, and helping to kind of just drive digital transformation for organizations. So that's actually where I started my career. And then I think over the last couple of years, kind of go back now like 3-4 years-ish, I started to dive a little bit more into cybersecurity because there's some components, like if you've been in the technology world within databases and AI, ML, there's some overlap, not a whole lot, but there are a couple of overlap that actually leads you from that world into cybersecurity, and it makes that a lot more easier to actually get a hang of. And then over the last couple of years, a lot of the cybersecurity companies started to come up from like 2019. We started to see a lot of the IPOs, and we started to see some of these companies be really successful. And so naturally, it was just more easier to just learn about those companies. And quite frankly, I just found myself fascinated by the companies and how they were doing and why they were doing really well, as opposed to other technology companies and software. And yeah, it's just been an interesting journey, and I kind of call myself, I've gone down a rabbit hole, and I just can't stop being in that rabbit hole now for quite a couple of years. And yeah, that's kind of how I find myself there now.
So I assume cybersecurity has been around for as long as the internet's been around. You know, it's certainly transformed itself, I guess, over the last 20, 30 years, and then especially the last maybe 10 years, as you've seen more companies migrate to the cloud. Now you have work from home. You know, every company has obviously websites, mobile apps, and, you know, a million endpoints that they have to protect. So you've probably seen a lot more cybersecurities, like you said, not just start up, but also come public. You know, I'm thinking of CrowdStrike and Zscaler and SentinelOne are kind of, the last three that I'm thinking of. And then you have the legacy players like Palo Alto and Fortinet, and, I guess, I don't know if Oracle's in there, Cisco. I mean, I guess they all have like little small divisions of cybersecurity. I'm trying to think how to phrase this. Why has cybersecurity become such a growth story? Is it because of the migration to the cloud and digital transformation, or is it because there's just so many bad actors and hackers around the world that are trying to steal data and cause harm that companies have to spend more money on cybersecurity? I mean, or is it's both of those?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mix of both, quite frankly. I mean, so kind of going back, as we kind of talked about it, cybersecurity has pretty much been in existence from the very beginning of the internet. I think one of the very first in about early 2000s was kind of when you got like the first DDoS attack, kind of like denial of service attack, where you just flood a computer system. And so we've always had them, and that gave roles to the companies like McAfee, and like that's when McAfee and like exactly like likes of semantics. I mean, quite frankly, I mean, in the 2000s, those were like the growth stories of those days, right? Because in the early days of the internet, kind of as you have with any other technology, you're always going to get bad actors, right? You're always.
I was just going to say, after I asked the question, I'm thinking like, if you didn't have bad actors, you wouldn't need cybersecurity in the first place, right?
Exactly. I mean, it comes down from the human nature for greed and how do you steal money and how do you extort money from people. And so, anyways, we've kind of gone through this cycle of security, but I think what's happened over the last couple of years has been as cloud, and to be honest, like cloud and digital transformation, when we mean digital transformation, it just means many companies are moving more workloads to the clouds and delivering software at a much faster pace. That's actually been an enabler for some of these hackers, because now what you have in the olden days, I guess not the olden days as much, but like in the early 2000s, you had an on-prem workload, right? So most enterprises were built around workloads where you built your servers, you had like these big machines in the
You
company,
like a whole room just full of stacks of servers, right?
Exactly. And then the good thing about that was you could actually control your environment. You could control everything, because in those servers, you had your operating systems, you had your data, you had your applications, and you were in control. No one in like Taiwan or Europe or another part of the States or something could actually control. You controlled everything. But now the fact that we've now gone into like this hyper distributed world where everything is now on the public cloud, right? Where we're all sharing information. A lot of information is now being assimilated amongst lots of organizations, and we're living in a more distributed world right now. And so with that, now you have a lot more risk, because now you're no longer in control. Now you're putting your information out there, and there's a lot of people who actually have access to that same information. And so what you have with that then is that then increases the level of threat from a wide variety of areas, right? And so that's actually been an accelerant. And so as you've just had this world with the cloud, you've also had a lot of this bad actors have actually improved their capabilities, because as technologies improve, they have also actually had the ability to actually improve their capabilities in terms of how they like deliver ransomware attacks, malwares, and all that kind of stuff through the internet. And so it's kind of funny too, when we talk about technology being an enabler for the security companies themselves, it's also been an enabler as well too for the hackers themselves. And so what we've seen anyways over the last 5 years now is, I think there's three major areas when people should actually think about what are the tailwinds for security. I think the first piece is, first of all, organizations themselves have to secure themselves, right? So as you're moving to the cloud, as you're like delivering and building more apps, more data is actually on the internet, you need to secure yourself. And so enterprises themselves, as they grow, they've decided to have to protect them. So that's one. But also two, you want to avoid a data breach. The cost of a data breach is huge, right? Think about what happened to Facebook in 2016.
So let me stop. What's the biggest cost? Is it because like Facebook, right? If Facebook gets breached and some of my personal data, is leaked to someone, I'm not going to leave Facebook because of it, right? But is the penalty to Facebook like not just reputational, but does Congress come in and give them big fines for it?
Exactly. And actually, that was going to be the next tailwind I was even going to talk about. So it's like enterprises, but then you have all these regulatory pressures now that are coming from governments who are like, nope, you have to have certain level of standards. Like, I don't know if you've heard about the Biden administration. They've been releasing a couple of executive orders around zero trust architectures for companies. Like, a lot of these regulations are coming in place just so you avoid a situation whereby all of our information that's on Twitter, on Facebook, someone just doesn't have access to actually break in and make use of that information.
I feel like every 3 or 4 months you hear about a big one at like a big retail store, TJ Maxx, Target, Starbucks. I mean, maybe they haven't, a couple of those names do sound familiar, like they've had data breaches, but I know there's been a couple big ones.
Oh yeah, Indigo is like maybe just last month. They were down by just an attack. That's an example of like it's literally every day. I mean, almost every couple of weeks or months, we're actually hearing about all of these organizations that store a lot of our data.
And what's the biggest risk? Is it personal information being stolen? Like on Facebook, I don't care if someone really has my birth date or my favorite sports team, right? Like that's probably not the data they're going after. It's your financial information, your payment information, right?
So it's quite a couple. So it's brand. We talked about brand one. We talked about regulatory, like the fines you're actually going to get. But number three, in many of these cases, there's what we call ransomware as a service. So ransomware as a service is actually something that's actually where you actually like, I don't know if you've heard of stories where they kidnap your child, for example, and then you have to pay a certain amount of money before you get that child back. It's the same thing that's happening to organizations. So organization, for example, like Facebook, for example, it could be their most precious secret IP.
And the hackers will steal it and say, hey, we'll give it back to you for 200 million of Bitcoin.
Exactly. And actually, this particular ransomware, it's actually called ransomware as a service. Like that's actually how big of it's actually a big industry now. Like it's huge. Just Google RaaS on the internet. Like literally you extort people's money and then you tell them, hey, if you don't give us X number of money, we're actually going to put your information out there or leak your information. And then in those cases, companies have to commit and, okay, you know what, we're going to give you that money, or they risk like giving up a huge part of their IP, which is also brand damaging. So there's so many costs to it as well.
Every time I get one of these, spam emails, that I won money from some Nigerian prince, I think to myself, they wouldn't do it if it didn't work, if some idiot didn't fall for it at some point, which makes me think like we don't hear about a lot of the hacks and breaches. So they're probably happening just behind the scenes. We're just not hearing about them because someone's getting paid off, so the data never gets leaked or posted, that hacker's getting paid off by a big company. So how often does that really happen?
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. I mean, it's huge. I don't have a specific data point for this, but I know even email attacks, like email kinds of phishing attacks, like close to all attacks happen. Close to about 90% of attacks that actually come through email just by people just clicking on like wrong links or or emails or just not being careful on the internet, quite frankly. That's a big part of it. But yeah, it happens a lot of the time. But most cases companies don't reveal them because obviously there's huge brand damage if they actually were to reveal this. So yeah, we don't have public data as regards to that. But
yeah, because we only hear about the biggest and the worst ones.
Exactly. And in most of those cases, maybe a company refused to pay off a specific attacker or something. Or in some cases, it just leaks to the internet, like what happened to Okta. Right. Even Okta themselves got breached a couple of months ago. So it's crazy. So yeah, anyway, so you kind of have enterprises protected. You have regulatory pressures. You also have nation state attacks, like right now with what's happening with Taiwan. The stuff happening with Taiwan and China, or like with the Russia and Ukraine, maybe a little less with Russia and Ukraine because people were expecting a lot more attacks and that didn't actually happen. But yeah, you have nation state attacks too, and governments are trying to protect themselves. So tailwinds from literally private, public individuals as well. It's just like making sure this sector is just seeing tailwinds.
When the war broke out, everyone was trying to think about what sectors would benefit from the war, what could be which companies, I guess, not necessarily profit in a bad way, but still, I mean, defense companies, of course, right, because military spending, but then also cybersecurity, because people were saying if the U.S. comes to the aid of Ukraine, then Russia may not send a missile over to the U.S., but they might start attacking our systems, in a cyber warfare. So then U.S. companies and the U.S. government has to then spend more money, to protect our systems, to protect our internet, blah, blah, blah. Did any of that really happen? Or was the cybersecurity that we have so good that we were able to, defend it?
Surprisingly, actually, so the surprising stat about that was it wasn't as much. It wasn't as much as people were actually expecting. And I think, and honestly, I haven't found a really good explanation for this, but maybe the fact that Russia just knew the US were just ready. Like we were literally ready for any attacks. Like they had beefed up all their infrastructure. And obviously, especially Biden, he's been investing a lot more in security ever since like the first day he came into office and stuff, right? And so unfortunately, yeah, a lot of, I think I heard from Cloudflare, I think I've heard from the CEO a couple of times, as well as even Judge Currents over at CrowdStrike. There wasn't as much attacks. But I think I just heard this literally yesterday. They interviewed Judge Kuntz at CrowdStrike. But China and Taiwan, there's a lot more attacks that they're actually seeing happening within that part of the world, but not as much with Russia. But we know Russia's capable at any moment
Right.
of like
Oh, yeah.
crazy
But Putin's a complete psychopath. We know that. Maybe he was smart enough to realize, like, whatever I give to the US, they're just going to give right back to me twice as bad. And
exactly.
when you're fighting a war, like maybe you shouldn't pick fights that you can't win, or at least, focus on the battle at hand and not worry about the US coming after your infrastructure and, shutting down your systems and nuclear plants and whatever else they can do, with their own cyber attack. So, maybe Putin just made a calculated bet that not worth going after the US in that way.
Literally, I think he was probably just focused on Ukraine and kind of like accomplishing what he wanted over in Ukraine and leaving the US to what it is. But yeah, it's still up for grabs. Who knows when a big attack might come to us? But hopefully that doesn't happen. But yeah, there wasn't as much. So but it's a realistic anyways. North Korea, like you're also seeing, is like beyond just Russia, there's still a lot more like nation state attacks. Like North Korea has been doing their own thing. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff happening.
How big is cybersecurity around the world compared to the US? And does most of the cybersecurity that happens outside of the US come from US companies? Like, is it CrowdStrike and Palo Alto that are helping companies in Europe and helping companies in Asia? Or are there local cybersecurity companies in those countries?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I never really thought about. In most cases, McAfee, Palo Alto, Fortinet, some of these guys are global giants in the sense of like they're like, even Fortinet, I think their founder was it Singapore? I think he was like a Singaporean guy. Trying to think here. These companies are actually quite global. Like they're quite global than we actually expect them. But in terms of, I'm sure overseas China, I'm sure there's some of this Asia, Europe, they have like minor security companies and stuff. But in terms of like the giants of like globally, I think some of these US companies are actually like global companies, kind of like what you would have with Google. That's a global company. But you might have Russia. Russia has Yandex. I think Yandex is like the search engine for Russia and like one of the biggest economies. However, we know Google is still like the number one dominant player. So yeah, I might not be able to name a couple for those individual companies, but
I don't think I've ever, I don't spend a lot of time researching international companies unless they trade on the US exchanges, through an ADR. Because if they're not trading on the US exchanges, like I don't know what kind of SEC filings and compliance and audits that they have to go through. And, that's just one thing I don't want to have to worry about. And I can't think of any international companies that trade on the US exchange that are in that cybersecurity industry, which makes me wonder how many are actually out there. And if there are any, they're probably on the smaller side.
Yeah. They are, but Israel. So Israel produces like, I think like 70% of the largest companies in cybersecurity all come from Israel, which is kind of funny. So even though we might
there's a lot of technology coming out of Israel.
It's amazing. It's absolutely fascinating. I'm actually going to write about this.
Mobileye come out of Israel? Mobileye, that
I think
Intel bought them and then spun them off. For some reason, I feel like they came out of Israel. Let me just double check. I know like Iron Source and, there's a bunch of other companies.
Like Solar Edge. And then obviously within security, if we're talking about security, Checkpoint, which is one of the largest companies globally, they actually came out of Israel.
Yeah, Mobileye is headquartered in Israel.
Yeah.
So a lot of technology there. Let's talk about US companies then. Which ones do you follow the closest? Which ones are you the most excited about? We've seen a lot of these stocks pull back over the last year and a half as, growth stocks have corrected, technology stocks have corrected. It's obviously been a lot of the higher growth, higher beta, higher multiple names that have corrected more than, the larger cap stocks. So, Zscalers, CrowdStrikes, those types of companies, some of them are still down 50, 60, 70% from their all-time highs. SentinelOne. Which ones are you the most excited about right now? Not just valuation, not just because of valuation, but maybe because of their competitive advantages, maybe because of, their sustainable growth, their ability to, like CrowdStrike has all these different modules their ability to keep adding more modules for customers and, expand revenues that way. So which ones are you the most excited about?
For sure. I mean, to be honest, I'm just bullish on the whole sector. I mean, I think this time last year, I was focused on a variety of sectors in software specifically. And even when I was in venture capital for a huge part of last year and the year before, I did a lot of work on Snowflake, Databricks, and a wide variety of companies. But over the last, give or take 6 months or so, I've really narrowed it into security specifically. And I think, like, before we go into the names, but like, I think if we step back a little bit, like we talked about the high level tailwinds for security itself, but more so if we drill down a little bit into like where we're at right now in the current economic environment that we're in, I think even security continues to stand out. I literally just saw Morgan Stanley's CIO survey. I don't know if you followed that, but this is just where they interview a couple of executives across like a variety of large Fortune 500 companies and just ask them like, hey, what are you spending? How much are you spending on your IT budgets? And like continuously, I literally, since the recession began, we've literally seen like security software continues to be at the very top. Like, I mean, it just remains. And there's this particular question they always ask CISOs about like which of this, they give them like maybe close to about 10 to 15 categories in software where they're like, what do you like least to ever cut in a recession, especially where we're at right now. And like security continues to actually just, in fact, yesterday, the survey that just got released for this week, in the past, like I think security software used to always be like, yeah, like would most likely not cut it. Like but like literally for Q1 2023, literally just stood out. Like it was just like a clear line, just saying like we can't cut security no matter what. And so I think with that, like that gives you a lot of tailwinds that hey, companies are still investing and still putting money into this company. And I think we've also seen this during the growth rates too. I think if you look at all the various security companies over the last couple of quarters during this bear market, I think we've continued to see security companies continue to hold up. So just wanted to give you that like broader level. And quite frankly, I'm bullish on most of the names. I mean, especially Fortinet, Palo Alto, some of the larger names. But it depends on what category you want to go into.
I mean, so like I'm a stock picker. I like owning individual stocks, trying to find specific stories, secular growth stories that I think have 3, 4, 5 years of legs to them. Obviously everyone knows that Celsius has been a big holding of mine, and I do a lot in med tech. So I typically stay away from ETFs, especially index ETFs, but I do think there's value in sector ETFs. And one of the only sector ETFs that I would probably recommend, or like owning an ETF for a specific sector, is cybersecurity. Because this is such a secular growth story, and it will be for the next 5 or 10 years. It is so hard to pick the winner, to pick Zscaler versus CrowdStrike versus Palo Alto. Like, I think that they're all going to win. Maybe one wins a little bit more than the other one. Maybe, one returns a little bit more in terms of stock price over the next 5 or 10 years than the next one. But if cybersecurity continues to grow, I mean, they should all do pretty well. So maybe that's one strategy is, just own the ETF and not worry about owning the individual names. But like, how should we think about it? Like, how is CrowdStrike different from SentinelOne versus Zscaler? Because they're all a little different, right? They all protect different parts of a business or different parts of the network.
Exactly. So let's step back a little bit there. So, on the ETF front, I think absolutely. I think generally in investing, I think you always want to go that route. And there's this ETF called HACK, HCH, and I think that's like the one security ETF. But the problem with, and I recommend that. I'm not recommending anything.
The problem is you own a lot of those ETFs are like 20 or 25 stocks. So
exactly.
You might like 5 or 6, but you have to own all the rest of them too.
Exactly. And you want to be careful in security because there's some companies that are just like pretty much garbage companies. I mean, hate to say that, but they're just like single digit growth rates, like pretty horrible. I mean, and then obviously you have some of the more growth story and even more like durable growth story. Like I think my two favorites, like if, no matter what will happen in security, if I were to balance for both growth, value, and growth, like Fortinet and Palo Alto, I mean, I don't think you could ever go wrong by not owning those companies, right? Like to kind of go back to that. But yeah, but there's Hack ETF and those companies. But in terms of security,
there's 3 or 4 of them, and they're all a little different. So, you know, if you look at the top holdings in one, you might like those top holdings more than the top holdings in another. But you got to worry about all the other stocks in there, and maybe you don't want to have exposure to them.
Exactly. Well. Maybe you don't want to have like Cisco, VMware, like some of those right. Juniper networks and stuff like that. So don't even bring up those names. But anyways, I'll come to your question about CrowdStrike versus setting on one. But I think the way people should actually think about security, because there are quite a number of them, like there are quite a number of these companies. And the easiest framework I love to give people is to think about 3 major categories. So think of network security. So there's network. So network security primarily just has to do with like when you click on websites, the way you put in that URL, youtube.com, google.com, or whatever website you go into, how do you make sure you're protecting those websites? You've had situations where you go to a bad website and it actually blocks you off, right? So those are your network companies. And the companies that you have within network security are like Fortinet, that's Fortinet, Palo Alto, like a huge part of when you hear about firewalls literally has to do with protecting you on the web once you're browsing on the internet. So Fortinet, Palo Alto, Zscaler as well as like Cloudflare. So those are companies that are generally like network website security. This is just for someone who, without getting into technical, that's a very easy way to think about them. And the second types of companies then are like endpoint security companies. And so those are where you have your CrowdStrike, you have your SentinelOne, you have your McAfee's of the world, and you have some of those other companies, CyberReason, which is a private company. Endpoint has to do specifically with, so now you're browsing on the website, you've gone to your favorite website, but now you need to download a document off the website, right? And you need to make sure that those documents don't actually affect your laptop or affect your device, right? And so those are where we call endpoints. And the meaning of that word endpoint just has to do with like the device itself. So some companies too, they might have on their live servers, they might have their printers, they might have all of these devices where they actually need to protect. And those are the endpoints that actually protect those devices. And then you have identity security, which is the third bucket. Identity security obviously has to do with literally almost every website you go where you have to authenticate yourself, right? You have to put in your email, password, blah, 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 right? Like, so I think that's pretty straightforward for people to understand.
And that's also like, you know, people that are working from home that have to log on to the, you know, the corporate website or whatever to, you know, to do whatever.
Exactly. And in the fourth bucket, you could kind of put this as like cloud security / data security. Although you could even segment that, but I just want to make this as easy for people to follow. But that fourth bucket would be like maybe cloud security and data security. So cloud security primarily just has to be with companies that are now building applications on the cloud, right? No longer doing it on-prem. How do you make sure you're protecting your workload now that it's on the cloud, where you're not only the person, it's a multi-tenant workload where you have a bunch of other people and you want to make sure your information is secure on the cloud? How do you make sure your workloads are secure? How do you make sure you have good visibility into all your applications and developer security? And so that's kind of that bucket of like cloud security. Some aspect of what DDOG now does is like doing some of that. Some aspects of Palo Alto's business also has that. But cloud security, a lot of the private companies are like companies crushing that space. And then within that cloud security, you could also put in like data security. So data security would be like a little bit things like your email, like things like that, just making sure all the data and your information, protecting those against leaks. So in general, I just want people to understand that's the easy framework. And then once you have that 4 buckets, then you could actually like categorize all the security companies and then think about how you want to play that.
So let's say you're Target and you announce that, you know, you've had a big data breach and 200 million customers, whatever the number is, you know, have had their financial information stolen. Like, which one of those buckets was breached?
It really depends on where the attacker came through. So that's the thing. The attacker could come through any of this and through any of these defenses. So it could be somebody who clicked on a phishing. So in a case where it's a phishing email through an email, we kind of categorize that maybe within the data security buckets. You kind of maybe bucket in web security some cases, but it'd be like maybe that's the way the attacker came in through the network. Or it could be like someone went to a bad website and that website was a malicious website.
So companies basically have to protect all the buckets.
So that's actually how it works, literally. So as an enterprise, think about yourself, or even just think about your home. You have to make sure, like an enterprise, you have to protect all of this buckets. So that's why
the hackers are going to find the weakest spot and come through there probably.
Exactly. They could come through, like they could get your email and password information, right? Like think about how many people have given their password out on the information. That's the identity side of things, right? Or it could be like you downloaded something bad on your website, or you downloaded some kind of malicious file onto your laptop, and then the attacker got into your network. Because the way you want to think about this is, and we don't need to go into zero trust versus like the traditional castle and moat infrastructure, but you want to think of a company having maybe even think about your home. Everyone has a Wi-Fi within their home. We all have a specific network into our home that we use to all log into the internet. And you can kind of think of that network as like a defense across where all your devices, everything's connected to that one network. And you could have different ways, and an attacker just needs to get into that network for them to cause damage, right? So they could come through email, they could come through the web, they could come through identity, they could come through a wide variety of ways. And once they come into any of those doors, you can't think about a house and there's different doors, and they could come into one of them. Once they've come into those doors, they could cause a lot of damage. They could see all your information and then cause issues and stuff. So
which of those four buckets is growing the fastest, is the biggest opportunity? And I'm just trying to think of, like, if you tell me that XYZ bucket is growing the fastest, what are the companies that are serving that bucket, i.e., which companies, which publicly traded companies, what might have the biggest opportunity going forward?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the easiest way to answer that is cloud security. So, obviously, the story of the last couple of years, and we've seen this with the hyperscalers, is everyone's moving to the cloud, especially with like work from home. That's been the fastest growing sector. However, on the public markets, and I know that those are where a lot of your audience are, a number of the public companies are diverting. They're actually building solutions to try to get into cloud security. But like Palo Alto is possibly the one that has like the best portfolio of cloud security products. But like obviously, DDOG is moving into cloud security from observability. Some aspects of what Zscaler has is also cloud security. Even CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, they're also moving that direction. But like the companies on the private market, like there's a company called Wiz. There's a company called Wiz. There's a company called Orca. There's a company called Sneak. Those are like the guys that are like really ripping apart the fastest growing category in cloud security. And that's like the market.
Are those companies public or private?
They're private. Some of these companies.
Okay.
So Sneak, Wiz, Orca, some of these guys they're private companies. However, on the public side, Palo Alto possibly has like if you want to play cloud security, they actually have a pretty strong portfolio of cloud security products as well. And obviously CrowdStrike and SentinelOne, they're also moving that direction. But in terms of which is like the most resilient bucket, or like if you're looking for like a 30 to 20% grower for like a decade or whatever, it's network security. Like network security is just the most, like I always call them, like if you're looking for like the moatiest, like the most resilient businesses have been built on network security. Like literally, that's why you have Fortinet, Palo Alto. They've been in existence for decades. Like even Fortinet, for example, it grew like 33% or above 30% last quarter on like 4 billion annual run rates. This is just without any acquisition. Like it's still growing over 30%. I think the rule of 40 on the company has been, it's had a rule of 40. It's maintained that threshold for the last 10 years or so. Akamai, Cisco, all these guys are built on network security, Fortinet. And I think that's why Cloudflare as well is seeing a lot of momentum, because a lot of their new products are going into that bucket as well too. So
companies are migrating to the cloud. Do you think we're ever going to see companies migrating back to on-prem?
I don't think you would ever, because it's just tremendous benefits that you have on the cloud. However, you're going to see hybrid workloads continue to happen, like where some companies put some data on-prem and as well as some on the cloud. I don't think we're ever going to get to a world where it's like 100% the whole world is cloud-based. I think you're going to see that on-prem and this happens a lot for companies that are like really sensitive information. So healthcare organizations, like financial institutions, insurance companies, like some of these like really sensitive organizations whereby like a breach could be significant. I mean, think about your bank being hacked. I mean, that's like you could get your information hacked at a retail store, you could get it anywhere hacked, but like you don't want to have that happen ever for your bank. So I think you're still seeing a lot of those, and like government organizations as well too. Those ones that are like extremely sensitive, because you still want to maintain some element of control.
If you're like a startup, I mean, 15, 20 years ago, you were starting a company, like your only option was to do on-prem. Now like you're a startup company raising money from VCs, like the last thing you're going to want to do is spend money to build, on-prem servers.
Exactly. And I mean, it's cheaper. I mean, obviously, like we did with like the early 2000s and stuff, like those big servers you had to buy, they're expensive. They're slower, they're not as performant. And so there's just tremendous benefits in terms of, especially in a world where software is being used as a competitive advantage, where you could roll out products, you want to deliver AI and ML faster for your customers and stuff. Like you want to be on the cloud because the benefits are just tremendous to actually help you get an edge over your competitor.
Do the big cloud providers like, AWS, Google Cloud, GCP, Microsoft Azure, DigitalOcean, kind of like player number 4 on the smaller side, do they have their own cybersecurity offerings as well?
Yeah. So yeah, it's a good question because not many people think a lot about that, but they do have security offerings across most of the buckets that we just talked about, across most of the bucket, because primarily they're providing their cloud security offerings. However, I could just quickly run through it very quickly. So Microsoft has quite a couple of, especially on the identity front. So they do have like their most robust, they call it Microsoft Active Directory. They're very, very strong in the identity front. But they do also have some network security, CASB, some SASE types of products on the network security side. They're very strong in endpoint security. I mean, obviously, I think everyone's seen them on Gartner's list as well. Microsoft Defender. So they're very strong on endpoint, they're very strong on, and then they have a couple of cloud security components, but they're very strong on identity and endpoint. Google on their own front, they're very strong. They acquired a company called Mandiant for like $5 billion.
Yep,
that's right. It's a company that has a lot of like security consulting services. So it's more on the services. That's even another bucket we didn't talk about, but we didn't really have to talk about it. But it's just like consulting services. Like if there's a breach and you need people to come in and assess like what happened and stuff, they do provide that. But they also provide some basic security features across, whether it's identity or like some, maybe not more as endpoint, but a couple of basic features. And AWS has a much more like robust security stack. However, it's very, very basic. And I think many companies, if you really want to get like security features, you want to go into like the best of breed companies. I think that's one. And number two, you don't want to have like your security product coming from the same company that you're building your workloads from. Like you want to make sure that you're able to have that like distinction.
I'm wondering, like in the world of venture capital, right? Like say you are Kleiner Perkins or Andreessen Horowitz or one of these guys that's writing, 100, 200, $300 million checks. Like you go in and you talk to, you meet with the CTO and you ask like, what's your stack? Oh, well, we host on AWS. Okay, who's your cybersecurity provider? Like, is there a go-to for companies, for high growth software companies? VC-backed companies, like who are they using for their protection?
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, a lot of companies these days are actually using like open source tools. So there's a lot more like open source tools that are coming up on the market, whether it's on the cloud security front, whether it's on the observability front, whether it's on the developer and application security front. There are a couple of open source tools on the market. However, there are a lot of high growth private companies, and especially when I focused a lot of my time there, we're actually like they were using other high growth software companies, because people don't realize this, but there's close to 3,000 security vendors and there's a lot of like startups. Yeah, like people don't realize that. So there's quite a bit. And so in many of those cases, they're using like other like high peer because let's be frank, a lot of the public companies, their features are quite expensive, and a lot of that caters a lot to like the larger enterprise. I mean, you have some there for medium size and small SMBs, but startups use a lot of like startups as well as like free open source tools as well. And if you even want to really quickly, I could even give you the key differentiating factors between CrowdStrike and SentinelOne.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm definitely curious.
Because one of the distinguishing factors between both of them is SentinelOne started out with the SMB market. So obviously them coming out early, they came out much later than CrowdStrike, like over about 3 years afterwards. They started within the SMB market, and now they're kind of moving up markets in their solution.
Now they're coming after CrowdStrike's enterprise customers.
Exactly. And obviously you have the same. CrowdStrike started from the enterprise side as well, and they're also moving down market as well too.
Because they like to bash each other on conference calls.
They do. It's a lot of fun. I mean, even recently,
they like to hire talent away from each other too.
That's exactly what I was just about to say. I think we just saw that like last month or 2 months ago, where they just hired like some really key executives from each other. So yeah, it's a very interesting battle that's happening between those guys.
I mean, you see that in every industry. I mean, like even in energy drinks, right? I mean, I'm a big Celsius guy, and they've been hiring away talent from like Monster, and because like those guys have the experience of growing brands across the country. They have all the relationships, with the big retail stores, and when you're trying to take your company from 300 million a year in revenues to 3 billion, that key talent makes a big difference.
It's huge, especially in the downturn that we're at right now, right? Like where a lot of it, like everyone's looking to the other side, who's going to come out stronger. And so if you could actually like, I think Snowflake CEO, I don't know if you had that quote, is like, it's like eating your competitors alive or something, like, but like taking your talent to actually eat your competitors alive. Like that's literally what you want to do, especially in the bear market right now. And I think, I think you've seen a lot of that with CrowdStrike and SentinelOne. And then obviously one of the benefits that SentinelOne actually has is they could be deployed on-prem as well as on the cloud as well. That's SentinelOne. Meanwhile, CrowdStrike has always just been like cloud-based from the very beginning. I think, and then also SentinelOne, their infrastructure technology itself was built to have a lot more automation, in the sense of if there was a breach that occurred in your company, a very simplified way of explaining this is you have an endpoint agent on the laptop or the computer that's actually able to like deal with all the different scenarios that could actually occur after a breach. Like it actually identifies the threats, it actually like attacks or like breaks up that threat from happening, and actually like remediates and cleans up your system. Meanwhile, with CrowdStrike, obviously CrowdStrike, they've improved their offering over time, and now they call themselves XDR. But initially, it was a case of CrowdStrike could identify, it collects a lot of data with the AI that they have. It actually like helps to block or remediate the attack itself. And then, especially if it was a big case, you needed to have some kind of a security person coming. That's kind of where you have like a consultant, like they call it an MDR service in security, managed detection and response. And so CrowdStrike has a lot more of this like security consultants that will come in and do like a manual investigation. Meanwhile, with SentinelOne, a lot of that whole process, that last process, is mostly automated with the infrastructure that they actually built. And you could actually see how that's a lot more beneficial for an SMB that doesn't have the resources to hire an extra consultant to come in, or might not have the budget to actually have like a full stack security team, you could actually make use of that. You could actually make use of them. And also, one of the benefits with that is with SentinelOne, the solution is actually built in such a way that you could very easily just buy it online, purchase it, get it out of the box, just install it easily across your small company or your SMB, and then just roll that out without needing to have like some kind of a security analyst or security architect come in and actually help the implementation. It's a lot more easy to just roll. And that's why they got a lot of success with SMBs. Meanwhile, CrowdStrike, you need some of that like security. So that's like,
I'm guessing a lot of small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses really don't have enough cybersecurity.
Oh yes. I mean, and in many of those cases,
is it because they don't know better, or because they don't want to spend the money, or both?
Well, I think there's two sides to that. I think the first side to that is obviously the need, like in the sense of like you're a larger corporation, you have millions of users, you have a lot more things you have to protect, as opposed to an SMB who you don't have as much infrastructure, you don't have as much things that you actually do need to protect. Like in terms of the scale and the breadth of your usage and customer breadth or whatever. So I think there's like the need itself, the larger you grow, the more you need more security sophistication.
I'm thinking of like, say you run a pet store chain and you have 6 stores and you have 40 employees and you do 10 million a year in revenues, but you are collecting financial data, payment data from your customers, both online and in store. I assume you probably need to protect that in some way. And
yes. Yeah, so there's a company that sector I mentioned called Managed Detection and Response, MDR. It's actually a big sector. I think the leading player in that company, actually, it's a company I hope goes public someday. It's called Active Wolf. There's a company called Sentry. There's actually quite a bit of companies, like just Google MDR players. And so what those guys actually do is provide security services for this small SMB shop. So if you're an SMB shop that actually needs security services, but you don't have the time, you don't have the resources, you don't have the talent to hire a staff team, you could actually just outsource a lot of your security services for a fee. So kind of like how you pay a subscription fee, you just pay a basic fee to those guys. So like, yeah, companies like Active Wolf, actually, they gain a lot of momentum. Like I've been looking at a lot of data on the private market, and they've been gaining a lot of traction because SMBs need to protect themselves over the last couple of years. But you don't have the budget to actually buy a full stack team, right? And so you could just pay Active Wolf a fee, and then Active Wolf just looks around your infrastructure, say, okay, what do you need to protect? And they actually help secure and protect a lot of that as well.
Do these companies have cyber insurance? Like, is there such a thing where, if you have cybersecurity, protection, but then you still get hacked, and there's a ransom involved, like, is there insurance to help cover the ransom?
So that's actually been a growing space over the last 2 or 3 years. I think like ever since COVID started, I've been seeing a lot more information and data on like companies starting to come up within cyber insurance. But there's even like the bear argument to that, in the sense of like, in some cases, it's really hard to be a cybersecurity insurance company. Think about
because you don't want to pay that out. So you're going to try to find every little hole that the company wasn't protecting and say, no, we're not paying out because, you didn't have this bucket protected. And that's how the hackers got in.
Exactly. I mean, there's just so many things you could come around, or even like the potential cost itself. I mean, you could get rid of early, like if you're not like a fight Geico, like some of these really big insurance companies or whatever that actually provide security insurance services. If you want to be like a startup that's doing cyber insurance, like, I mean, sometimes the cost could be quite huge.
One payout could put you out of business.
literally. So so I've actually
you would have to get like the Chubbs, the Berkshire Hathaways, the reinsurance companies, because they're the ones that all do like the reinsurance for hurricane insurance and that sort of thing. They have the balance
Exactly.
sheets, they can take it.
Exactly. And you're not seeing those guys getting just quite as yet. But anyways, this whole security insurance is something that's actually like taking a lot more traction. And I've read some really good articles over the last couple of years. And there are companies who are like wanting to come tackle this area because it's a reality. It's just something that could happen to anyone really. And you gotta have that sort of like buffer zone if you do get hacked, and like how do you protect yourself?
I almost wonder if that would invite more hackers into the system. If they knew that the insurance companies were just going to pay them off, would you see even more threats come through, more hacks? But
and that's why I said like this RaaS, ransomware as a service, it's a booming business because like people are literally like, I'm gonna be a hacker, but because you could do a lot of this stuff behind the scenes and just like hack a company, take some information off that company and say, hey, you got to pay this money. If you don't pay me this money, sorry. And so like ransomware as a service is actually like a career. Like people are actually like, obviously it's a horrible career, but it's a real business. People are making money.
Isn't there a company called HackerOne? And is it HackerOne, or like, can you hire them to try to hack your system to find the vulnerabilities?
Yeah, well, there are a couple of companies who do things like this, but I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe I should probably read more about that.
I'll double check. I think there's a company out there called HackerOne. Now, I don't know if that's specifically what they do, but then like sometimes I'll see someone post on Twitter that there's a reward. If anyone can break, hack the system, they can actually, win a prize. And I guess that's how companies, to. Like, I guess it makes sense, and trying to break into your system. It's like, it's kind of like if you build a safe and you want to know how good of a safe it is, invite 3 or 4 of the world's best safe crackers to try to get into it. And if they if they can get into it, I guess the safe isn't good enough.
Yeah. Oh, trust me. There are a couple of companies who are doing things like this. I think I don't know too much about HackerOne, but I think they definitely do something about this where they're continuously monitoring your workloads, your environment, just to make sure that like nothing is out. And quite frankly, a lot of these companies are starting to have those types of features, what's called continuous monitoring or vulnerability management, whereby you're just constantly scanning companies every night. At the end of a workday, you're scanning everything that's within the company to actually make sure that like, hey, hopefully there's no leak, there's no settings, someone didn't just leave something open and forgot to turn off something. I think you've seen that. And then there's also a company that was acquired by Palo Alto, actually called Expanse. The sector is called external attack surface management, but essentially what that whole means is this is a company that specializes in like actually saying, hey, we're very good at like stepping behind the scenes and behaving like we're looking at your company from the outside to actually see how could we attack your company, right? So that's why it's called external attack surface management, because what they specialize in is like helping companies look behind, like you got to get out of yourself.
Right,
actually
like putting themselves in the shoes of the hackers. Like if we were going to go after this company and their network, how would we attack it? Where would we attack it?
Exactly. How will we go after it? And so, yeah, we've seen those types of companies are definitely out there. But yeah, vulnerability management.
It's crazy how big this industry has gotten, all because of the bad actors, right?
It's insane.
If there weren't hackers out there trying to profit off of these vulnerabilities, you wouldn't need cybersecurity in the first place. So
no, you wouldn't. And it's just a reality. People are making money. Security is like hacking is actually being something that's profitable for people. And so the more that's profitable, the more attacks companies are going to face, and the more they have to protect these companies. And then the more you have more security companies, and it just become a tailwind. It's just like a virtuous cycle that continues to work. So except you could actually find something that stops the attackers themselves or disincentivizes them from going after what they're doing. That's actually where you could actually say no more spending on security companies. But as long as that, it just continues to go as a cycle, and companies just have to keep investing in these sectors, right?
Last question, where are, I know we talked about Russia. Is Russia, are the most amount of hacks coming out of Russia?
not only them, I think you want to also, I mean, it's sometimes, except I was working at a security company, I could actually give you that like core data on where it's coming from. But the folks that have the most capabilities are like Iran, like the sub companies in Iran, obviously North Korea for sure is one. China has good capabilities as well as Russia. Those are some of like, yeah, like in terms of like, but yeah, like the guys over in Iran, those guys are like quite have some crazy sophistication. But on the other side of in terms of companies that are like producing the best of the best, Israel continues to just be like the one place that like just even like a ton of like high potential startups are just like coming out of Israel consistently.
I mean, I would think fintech companies, right? There's so many fintech startups out there now. I mean, and they all have financial investment information of their customers. I mean, they better be spending money on cybersecurity because I would think that they're all, potential targets.
Oh yeah. I mean, every single company, like no matter what sector you are, you have to have some kind of, especially if you're a consumer-facing company, that people actually have to
like think of Square and Cash App. Like, can you imagine there was like a hack on Cash App and everyone's financial information, banking information, credit card information was stolen? Holy crap. Like that would be insane.
It's scary. It's scary. I mean, and that's why this company is, that's why this company is.
I'm sure the hackers, there's probably hackers trying every single day to get in there.
100%, because they know that's where, obviously, it's like that's where your most biggest incentive would be. I mean, think about someone.
That's the holy grail for them, we're one of the holy grails.
It's literally the holy grail. Or in terms of nation state attacks, trying to get something to the White House too, or some of those as well. Yeah, so it's insane. It's a crazy sector. It's fascinating.
Is Bitcoin the currency that they all get, like the ransom currency for the criminals? Are they all getting paid in Bitcoin?
I think you do have a couple, obviously, that do facilitate payments through that. But I think there's other ways in which the wire transfer is like behind the scenes or like through block markets and stuff like that. There's ways these things happen.
Because like whenever you see politicians talking about, the bad stuff with crypto, they all like to bring up the fact that it's the currency of the criminals.
Yes, exactly. And trust me, there are actually quite a company out in crypto security. There's actually one company called Chain Analysis. Actually, right. Yeah, exactly. Like Chain Analysis. There are actually now even some companies, another company called Sardine.ai. Like that's a company that does security specifically for fintech types of companies. But you have it like there's a number of security companies that are actually going to be emerging. Like another one called Fireblocks, but security companies for crypto and that whole ecosystem as well.
Which is
security is just insane. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. It's also way over my head, trust me.
Well, we'll have to come back again and do this again. We can talk more about some of the other companies as well. So, I mean, we could talk about this stuff for forever, but I will end it there. Francis, where's the best place for people to find your work?
For sure. You can find me over on Twitter. I'm at InvestiAnalyst. So that's InvestI, INVEAISTI, InvestiAnalyst on Twitter, or you could just find me over at Software Analyst on Substack or InvestiAnalyst.
We'll put all those links in the show notes just so people can find them easier. Well, thank you very much. Great to finally get a chance to talk to you, and certainly wish you the best. And let's do this again in a few months.
Sounds good, man. All right. Thanks, Jonah.
Talk to you later.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
You too.